Welcome to the Triage Method Podcast Q&A edition with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. For those of you who aren't aware, the Thursday episode is part of our podcast, the Triage Method Podcast. By the way, we are a coaching and education company. We discuss things related to health and fitness and all peripheral subjects. And basically what we do is on the podcast on Mondays, we normally discuss a kind of broader topic for longer. And on Thursdays, we generally take a question and we discuss it. It's generally pretty quick. So try to keep it under the 20-minute mark. It's often longer, but I think today should be a nice little quick one. So with that said, what is our question for this week, Paddy?
This was a question that I was again discussing with someone in real life, and they were asking whether they should go back to college and get a degree. They're a coach, and they're kind of like, oh, do I need a degree to be a good coach? That's what they were kind of thinking, because they know that, well, first of all, the two of us have degrees, and they know a good few other people that have degrees that are good coaches. But they also were like, is it really necessary to be a good coach, right? And that's basically the question that we have today. Do you need a degree to be a good, we'll call it health and fitness coach, whatever this field is, do you need a degree for that? And my perspective was, no, you actually just don't need a degree. You need the information for sure, but you actually don't need a degree. It's not like it's like you're a doctor or something, and it's like you need that degree to prove that you have this information. That's the only way you're going to be able to practice medicine. It's not like you're an accountant where it's like you have to do these exams and get the certificate or degree or whatever from that to be like, yes, you are able to do this. It's not like it's physiotherapy. It's not like that. People are out there practicing as coaches, having done an overnight degree certificate online, so that's good and bad about the industry. However, it obviously allows you, if you are an individual that is thinking like, oh, should I get a degree? It allows you to be in a position where you're like, okay, I don't need a degree to practice. However, if that's the barrier of entry is so low, all I have to do is actually be very educated on the topics that I'm talking about, and I can clearly do better than these people that are, they literally got their certificate overnight, So that's my kind of perspective on it. I'm like, no, you don't need a degree. However, you definitely need information, and that is one of the reasons we created a coach's corner, not to be turn this into a sales pitch, but that was one of the reasons we created a coach's corner, because I know when we were growing up, when we were getting into this field and everything, there's nowhere that you could go that'd be like, this is for coaches. This is how you actually put together coaching practice. This is how you do all the stuff that's to do with coaching. And quite frankly, you can't even get that in a degree. Most degrees, they give you information. They don't give you the application of it. Even in you did physiotherapy. Now I wasn't there with you holding your hand like I normally am. But there's not a huge amount of actual, we'll call it application, in terms of they're not showing you how to run your business. They're not showing you all of the different things that you would need to actually be a physiotherapy practitioner. Yeah, for sure, it might be covered, but it's not that's, they're giving you the information, and obviously you have to do placements and stuff like that, practicals, whatever, but it's here's the information. And you can get information free online in this day and age. Our website, full of information. If you just need information, it's cool. It's free right there. Type in Triage Method, go to our website. There's a search function. We've probably written on it. We've written on thousands upon thousands of words, so it's probably there, right? And if it's not, it's going to be, right? So you can get information anywhere. You don't need a degree for that, and you don't need a piece of paper that says you have a degree to do well or even access this industry, So my perspective is, no, you don't need to get a degree. However, you do need to get the information, and there's multiple places you can get that information. We're obviously biased and would suggest the Coach's Corner, or if you're like, that's not for me right now, we have a lot of free information online. But what's your perspective on this, Gary? Do you agree with that? Do you think someone could go above and beyond and get a degree and be in a good position? Because I'm going to cover it after you speak, but there are a few certain select times where I'm like, it probably would make sense to get a degree. But anyway, what's your perspective?
For me, the answer is no, but I'll play both devil's and angel's advocates to try to give people some different perspectives on that. But like, firstly, what we're talking about here is an individual personal trainer or fitness trainer of some sort. So we're not talking about you being a coach in the NFL, you know, for example. Obviously, there are different types of coaches, and you know, when people think of the word coach, they might actually think of a strength and conditioning coach that works with high level athletes or something like that. I don't know what the recruitment process for such coaches is like, but my understanding from speaking to some people is that there is an increasing demand for degree level education among those types of professionals. And a lot of the times you will have people who have maybe a BSc in exercise science, or they might have a master's in strength and conditioning or exercise science, who do go into such professions in high level sport.
And
That's
just
not
on
to,
that, just
yeah.
on that as well, most of them in America, especially, do actually require you to do the CSCS if you are getting
Yes,
into that.
it
And to
requires a
do your
degree.
to do your CSCS, that requires you have a degree. It could be in anything. Like you could do an arts degree, but you have to have a degree to do your CSCS. You know, so that was one of the things that I was like, in certain fields, you're going to need to get a degree to get the cert to get access to it. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, so that is just an important caveat, because obviously we primarily talk to personal trainers, but I appreciate that I do know some people who work both as personal trainers and as strength and conditioning coaches, and who have the intent of pushing on with the S&C side of things to high level sport. And I actually have one, he's not with me at the moment, but he was a long-term client and friend who recently went back to college to do a master's in strength and conditioning so that he could go on and specialize in strength conditioning coaching. So that is a different ball game. But for our purposes, we're primarily talking about personal trainers. And when it comes to personal training, obviously most of you will be aware that there aren't really standardized education requirements. Now, with that said, there are requirements from governing bodies as to what personal training certifications should include, because that's something that we had been looking into ourselves just to see, you know, what are the actual standards. But when you even look at the standards for education, they're very, very vague. You know, they're quite vague. You know, you might have to mention something within your personal training course, but there's not necessarily screening as to, you know, how evidence-based that is, for example, or, you know, how you actually go and find answers. There's not training on like scientific thinking or anything like that, for example. And these things are probably becoming increasingly important in the field of personal training, because there is so much information available for personal trainers. There's so many services available for personal trainers that even the ability to decipher the good from the bad, the true from the false, is becoming increasingly difficult. And that is something that I think I have to keep in mind when I'm answering this question, because my knee-jerk reaction is, no, you don't need a degree. However, I'm coming at that as someone who started a BSc in exercise science. So initially went into university for exercise science, swapped to physiotherapy, finished a physiotherapy degree, and now is studying medicine. So it would be completely ridiculous for me to say that I haven't been in some way influenced by university education. I think that there have been, we've discussed this on the podcast before, I think there are both direct and indirect benefits. I think there are some things that I've learned through university education that have absolutely carried over to my coaching practice, but that's obviously because I studied physiotherapy, which is an applied degree. So even just the experience working with different populations carried over to my coaching practice. You know, communicating with more people carried over to my coaching practice. However, what I would say is that those kind of non-specific skills that I gained from physiotherapy education can be gained through personal training practice as well. This is something that's important to get, is that as a personal trainer, you don't necessarily have to act just as an individual who's seeking out information and then applies it to the person and sees what happened and assesses what happens. What you can do is kind of think about, how could I build education into my practice as a personal trainer? So that might include things like getting feedback from your clients, or when you encounter a new client who is, let's say, not your average client. So let's say you normally work with the demographic of 20 to 30-year-olds, and you have a 45-year-old female with 3 kids and a busy job, and you've never worked with that person, what you could do is reach out to other coaches. So if you have a directory of coaches with whom you communicate regularly, and you say, here guys, you're into your WhatsApp chat or whatever. Hey guys, I have a new client case. I haven't worked with clients like this before. What do you guys think? Or do you know anywhere I could learn more about working with these types of clients? And by doing that, you start to level up yourself. And that's something that Patty said, is that information is still really, really important. And if you can get that kind of information with implementation, that's even better. And you can, thankfully, because of the internet, if you use it properly, you can outsource your experience to some degree, whether that be a membership site such as the Coaches Corner, or whether it be you just reaching out to other coaches. You can go on Instagram, follow a heap of coaches and see who they work with and try to get their experience. And that doesn't always mean that it's going to be correct, but it also doesn't mean that if you do a university degree that it's going to be correct. Because, I've had educators that I worked with in physiotherapy who I thought weren't great at all, to be honest, or different. If you're getting education in a university context, let's say, and it does have that, let's say, apprenticeship model. So like in physiotherapy, where you actually have practice education and you have an educator, it's not guaranteed that that person is actually going to have all the answers. So it's the same in university as it is in the real world. Similarly, in university, is your lecturer going to know everything? Absolutely not. Is the personal trainer that you seek advice from going to have all the advice for you as a young trainer? Absolutely not. Some of it mightn't be useful. But the point is that you have this intent to constantly level up, and you have this humility to say that I don't know everything about working with all these different demographics. I might have some skills that I've cultivated, but I'm probably not at a very high level, and I'm definitely not at a very high level across all demographics. So I'm going to outsource that experience, outsource that education to some degree, and use a network to try and move forward. So I think yes, there are definitely benefits to university education. I think in particular, if you have a science-based degree that actually teaches you concepts related to critical thinking and scientific thinking and how to seek out good information, of course there are benefits to that. But with that said, you can learn that on YouTube if you wish. I mean, it's there. Yeah, I don't know much else to say on that, to be honest.
Basically, my perspective on that, to further my perspective that I've already given, is like, if you need your degree, or rather, if your degree would actually bolster your image, for example, like we both have degrees, and that does somewhat go in our favor because we are trying to provide education, Yeah. So if people are like, oh, well, what are your credentials? I can be like, well, I have a degree in this, You can be like, I have a degree in this, So that gives some merit to it. Now, if you're training a population of people that are like, what are your qualifications in this? What is your degree? Like, obviously, it's going to work in your favor if you have a degree, However, in a personal training context or even a coaching context, a lot of the time, like, your results are what matters, Like, people hiring you don't care if you have a degree or not, if you're the person that gets phenomenal results, Now, of course, as we were saying, there are certain times where, they, as a barrier of entry, so they don't have to interview thousands of people that are just completely unqualified. They generally, if we're talking about like strength and conditioning coaching, or even some higher level personal training coaching, like companies and stuff, they'll just be like, as a weeding out process, they'll just be like, right, you need to have this qualification, such as the CSCS, which is that American strength and conditioning qualification. And it's like, yeah, like if you want to work in the NFL, I'm like, they pretty much require that. I'm sure there's some backdoors away around it or whatever, but if you're in North America, I'm like, that, it's pretty much required if you want to work in that field. And to get that certificate, you need to have a degree. So if that's the case and that's what you want to go down, then obviously you're going to need a degree. However, if you are just a personal trainer who just wants to train people and, create a good business around that, help a lot of people, such as, the demographic that you want to help, then you don't need a degree, like, yeah, for sure, it can help. However, I would also potentially argue that it could hinder you as well, because taking 4 years out of actually being able to help people and build your business, like that's not really sustainable for a lot of people, However, if you want to be an educator, we'll say, like effectively what we do, and you want to, go down that avenue of, the health and fitness industry, a degree could potentially help you. Now, that's still not required. Like if you are someone who doesn't have a degree and you're able to get phenomenal results, you're able to articulate the rationale between the rationale for why you're able to get these results. Nobody cares if you have a degree or not. They care about the information that you're able to provide to them at the end of the day, So there are a few potential avenues that would require a degree, like especially if you are trying to, especially if you're trying to educate other strength and conditioning coaches or other personal trainers. I'm like, it probably does make sense. Like if you're trying to get a university, job as a strength and conditioning educator, like they're gonna pretty much require you to have a degree and probably a master's at the very least, so like that's obviously going to require something above and beyond, rather than just like, oh, well, I got my cert 10 years ago, I've been getting great results in the meantime. Like that's not going to cut it, However, if you're just training Mary down the street and you've trained 12 of her mates and you've got phenomenal results with all of them, like she doesn't care whether you got a degree or not, So it really depends on what you want to do with your coaching practice, I suppose. Like again, if you want to be a CrossFit coach, and you probably need to have your CrossFit level 1 at least, and that's what you require. You don't need to have a degree for that, as far as I'm aware. So it really just depends what you want to do, how you want to coach, who you want to coach, and all of that jazz. Like if you want to write about stuff, again, it might maybe in your benefit to have a degree, But if you just want to coach people and you're like, I just want to help as many people as I can, with this population that I help, probably don't need a degree. So my perspective on it is, for most people in the coaching community, we'll say, you don't need a degree. You just don't. It can definitely be helpful, and for sure, if you're like, yeah, I have a degree in some sort of, we'll say, biological science, like whatever that is, even if it's an applied biology, like physiotherapy, or, science adjacent, as I like to call it, physiotherapy. But like, again, that could be very helpful for your, long-term trajectory in the industry. However, it's definitely not required.
Yep. And I think as well, like just on that note, that it's very popular for people to just assume that they should move from being personal trainers to becoming educators. It's quite common, especially now, because you can be an educator online and try to monetize that.
Like us.
Like us. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It's like for us, it definitely makes sense to try to move in the education direction, not just because it's clearly what we're interested in and that we have additional backgrounds, that we feel probably is useful for personal trainers, but it's also something that we've gotten feedback on over the years since we started Triage, was that, we love your educational content. I'd love to hear more about this. I'd like you, if you could, put something together on this. And, that's kind of a sign to us that, the education side of things is probably something that will be useful, particularly because we both read a lot and study a lot and like putting out information. It makes sense longer term to move our business towards that model over time. But if you're a personal trainer, don't get too excited about that. If you like coaching people, you can stay coaching people and make a good living in terms of like for the financial side of things. For sure, you can do very, very well as a personal trainer. It can be a lot more lucrative than I think a lot of people think. But additionally, you can just enjoy it. If that's what you like, you mightn't actually like just writing for the rest of your life, and it can be a difficult thing to monetize as well. So yeah, just remember what your business model is. I guess I'm a business guru now as well as the rest.
Well, I actually am a business guru, but yourself. Anyway, I've nothing else to say, Gary. Where can people find us? Where can they engage with our content? Where can they find more about the Coach's Corner, especially, to turn this completely into a sales pitch?
Well, as I mentioned, we are a coaching and education company. So firstly, coaching, if you're interested in coaching, you can work with us. We do have spaces available, although I said that we're moving in the education or in the direction of education with our company. We do still coach people. We have specific numbers that we keep to make sure that we can offer a good service. And we do have spaces available at the moment. If you're interested, you can find information below. Now, with that said, if you're a trainer, you listen to this podcast and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to save myself. I'm not going to spend 45 grand a year, or sorry, 45. I was thinking of the Canadians there for a second. I'm not going to spend 60 grand on a degree like Gary. I'm not going to be stupid. Instead, I'm going to sign up to the Coach's Corner to get my education. So you can do that. Obviously, we do have a member site where we publish a lot of educational content specific to personal trainers. If you happen to be interested, subscribe, and if you're not interested in that and you just want to keep up with our content generally, I'd recommend joining the Triage Method community. That's our Facebook group. You can also join the Triage Method newsletter below, and you can just follow along with our social media. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Triage Method on all the above, and you will find us there.
Yes, I don't think else to add, Gary.
Perfect. It's too easy.